friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the Hello Bluebird Best Days stamp set. I've already made a couple cards using this set, including this one with these fall vibes, and then here is one that's a little bit more summery. And today I'm going to be doing one that's kind of similar to the fall one I did, but it will have a few unique things because I never like to make the same exact card, more than once. So I will be using some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Cozy Days collection. So I've tucked one under my cardstock panel so that I can color to match. I will be using my Copic markers today, and my images are stamped on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink. I'm starting with the girl's skin, and I'm using E000, E00, and E11. Since she's facing toward the right, I'm going to do most of her shading on the left-hand side, casting a shadow under her hairline. I also added a little shadow on the other side of her nose and on the tops of her hands and the backs of her legs, and then blended out with the other two shades. And then I added some rosy cheeks using R11 and R20. Used the R20 first and traced around the edge of that with the R11. For her hair, I'm going to use E51, E53, E55, E57, and E59, although I'm going to end up not using that E59 at all. But in this little set of 5 markers, you have so many different hair tones. You can go from super light blonde to really dark brunette just by how much of each of these shades you use and how many layers you do. So I always like to start with my lightest shade for hair and build up the color and see where I want it to go. So I started with that E51 and began to flick in some color, and now I'm going in with that E53 and darkening things up. Then I'll come in with the E55, and the darker I go, the shorter my strokes get, and also the thinner my strokes get. So I start using the very tip of my marker and light pressure to just do some little sweeping motions to add that color in. And then I'm going to blend that back out. So I just started with those first 3 shades, and now I'm working my way back down in the reverse using that E53 to blend most of that out, and then I'll go back and add my E51 again. So here I could stop and I would have a really pretty nice blonde, but I'm going to decide to go a little bit darker. So you can kind of like take stock of the situation once you get to this point and see if you want to go. I wanted a little bit more depth, so I did move on to that E57 now and just added a bit of that in there as well. I like to add it to the ends of the hair and also any place like close to the scalp if there were a part. She doesn't have a part, so I just gave her a little, it's kind of like a 3-pronged thing up at the top of her head to kind of indicate some roots there, and also close to her headband going down the back. And then I'm going to blend that back out once again because I just want to, again, assess the situation, see if I want to go any darker. And I ended up deciding that I really liked this shade of kind of like a dark blonde or a really light brown. So I skipped the E59 like I said. For the ribbon in her hair, I wanted to go with kind of a mustardy yellow to match the mustard yellow that is in the pattern paper. There's actually 2 tones of yellow in that pattern paper. There's like a deeper mustard and then a brighter yellow. So I combined the 2 and used the brighter Y13 and Y15 with the darker YR23. And then I'm also going to use those shades to color in the 3 leaves. So I'll use that YR23 toward the stem, and I'll blend out with the Y15. and then use the Y13 to fill in all of the edges. And I really like this combination. It's very fall, but it's also still fresh because it has those brighter shades. So I think it's a great transition from summer into fall. It's got like the best of both worlds in that combo there. So I did 2 coats on both the ribbon and the leaves, and then I'm also going to do one of the flower centers with just the YR23 and the Y15, and then I also did one of the little flowers next to it on the outer part of it. Then I'm going to move on to some rusty orange shades. I'm going to use YR12, YR14, and YR27 to do her sweater. And I'm trying to pull out that rusty orange that is in that pattern paper. So I started with the YR27 for my shadows, and then I'm going to blend that out with the YR14. And I'm making sure to color over the edge of the YR27 because it is quite a bit darker. And then I filled in with the YR12. And I do like this combo, but it was looking a little dull compared to the rust that is in that pattern paper. So I went over everything with a second layer, trying to kind of beef up that saturation, but it just still wasn't bright enough for me. So I ended up pulling in the YR04, but the YR04 is quite a bit darker than the YR12. It's more like the mid-tone shade that I use, the YR14, although the YR04 is quite a bit brighter. So I had to do a third layer to kind of beef up the darkest shade, the shadows, and the mid-tone so that everything still had the same depth of coloring that I like. So once I was done with that, I moved on and colored one of the flowers in the little bouquet. And then I'm also going to do the ribbon on the gift. I accidentally started with the YR14, so I just blended that out with the YR04, but then I went back with the YR27 and added a bit more depth, and then did another layer with the YR14. For her jeans, I went with my favorite combo for jeans, which is B93, B95, and B97. And I'm using the B97 to lay in some shadow on the backs of her legs and also a little bit under her sweater where that would be casting a shadow. And then I'm going to blend that out with the B95. And I'm saving quite a bit of room for that highlight shade, so I'm going to use the B93 for that. But I'm actually going to add in a bit of like an indigo shade to kind of match those dusty purpley flowers that are in that pattern paper. So I grabbed B60. B60 was a little too light to make the transition from the B93, so I am also going to grab in the B63, which is a little bit darker, so I added a bit of that to kind of bridge the gap there. And I'm also going to color 2 of the flowers in the bouquet with the B66 and B63. I did throw in a little B60 in there as well for a highlight. And then I'm going to use all 3 of these shades for the balloon. So I'm starting at the bottom and going up the left side with the B66, and that's just based on where I'm going to end up putting that balloon on the card. It's going to be hanging from the back of the bicycle, so I'm going to keep the highlight the same as I did on the girl's face, which is on the right hand side. So I blended up with the B63 and then filled in with the B60. And then I did a second layer on that off screen, and I'm going to move on to my little corgis now. And for them, I'm going to use E30, E31, and E33, starting with the E33 and doing a shadow down the back, and also adding a little color on the front legs. And then I'm blending that out with the E31. And then I'll use the E30 as my lightest and also add some shading to the face with the E30. I absolutely love these corgis. There are actually another dog that's running in this set and also one that you can tuck into the basket. But I just really love these corgis. I think all of the dogs are so cute, but the corgis are just so different. So I had so much fun coloring them that I wanted to do 2 on this little scene. So I just stamped out the same corgi image twice. And I did a second layer on that guy to smooth everything out, and then added the shading, like I said, on the face and the whites of the body. And then I'm going to color the second corgi off screen for the main part because it was exactly the same. But I am going to add some extra color over top, and I'm going to do that with E43, E44, and E47. So I just wanted them to look a little bit different since it is the exact same image, so I'm going to do a different color tone. So I started with the E47, blended down with the E44, and then I'll go down to the E43 to kind of meet the E31 that would have been, that's down toward the belly. And I did do a second layer on that too to just smooth everything out. But I think having that E30s layer underneath kind of just added a little bit more interest, I guess, to the color combo. So there I'm going back with that E31 again to just bridge that gap and blend out that transition area. So let me know which corgi you prefer. I think they're both super cute though. While I have these colors out, I'm also going to use them to color in her shoe. So I just put the darkest at the back and blended forward with the lighter 2 shades. And I will also do 2 of the flower centers with the E44 and the E43. And I wanted to give my corgis some rosy cheeks as well, and also color the insides of their ears. So I went back to my R11 and R20. Just quickly colored those in. And then I'm going to go on to the black parts of the bicycle, and I'm going to use T3, T5, and T7. So I'm going to do the seat and also the pedals, the handlebars, and the tires. So I use that T7 first, and since all of these little areas are pretty small, I just went ahead and did them all at once. And I'm going to add that darkest shade on the tires closest to where the metal part of the bike would be. And then I'll start blending everything out with the T5 and bringing that color forward on those tires as well. So I'll have a highlight down at kind of the front bottom edge. It's not a corner because it's round, but you know what I mean. So my lightest shade is going to be the T3, so I'll fill in any of those little spots that still need some color, and then finish off the tires as well, just coloring over the edge of the T5 first to create that smooth transition, and then bringing that color toward the center of the tire. I'll continue using that T3 for any of the parts that I just want to look metallic. And then to blend that out, I'll add in T1. And I'm going to go back and do the metal part that is attaching the basket to the front with those shades as well. Use the T3 first, then the T1, and then a little more of the T3. And then for the actual bike, I'm going to go with R00, R01, and R02. So I'm using the R02 first, and for all of the like super skinny parts, I'm just going to fill it in completely with the R02 because there wasn't room for any blending on there. But for the larger parts, I will add the blending so it doesn't look too flat. The nib of that R02 was looking a little leaky, so I took off the other cap to kind of stabilize the pressure inside the barrel, and then continued to color, and I had no issues with it. So then I'm going to go in with the R01 and start to blend out any spaces that had the room for the blending. And then I'll also add a little bit of that R00 to finish things off and just create a little bit of a highlight. Once the bicycle is done, I'm also going to color in the last flower up in the bouquet with the R02 and the R01. And then I'm going to use E70 to add just a hint of dimension to the baskets. I'm going to use the same colors on the front one and the back one. So I'm just adding a tiny little shading by doing like a little slash mark in the corner of each of those little squares. So it just adds enough dimension to make it look like a white basket. And then I'll add in E71 and E74 to color in the gift, which by the way is not from the Best Days stamp set. I forgot to show the set it was from at the beginning of the video, but it was from Christmas is Coming from Hello Bluebird. Any of the gifts from any of the sets would work. This one was just the first one that was in my collection that had one, since I store my stamps in alphabetical order by manufacturer. So I let that dry for a bit because I wanted to add some little polka dots with the E74. If I would have done them too quickly, they would have just kind of blended in with the rest of the coloring. So it just gives a little bit of extra pattern to that little gift wrap. And then I'm going to do half of the leaves in the bouquet with G94 and G99. I wanted a nice olivey tone to match the little hand-drawn leaves that are in that pattern paper, but I didn't want them all to look exactly the same, so I decided to just do half of them and then use a different combo for the rest. And I'm going to use YG63 and YG67 for those. It's still very olivey in tone, but just a little bit of a different shade. Then I'm going to take my black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that started off to the side so that it's flowing nicely. And I'll go over the eyes of my two corgis and my little girl. And then I'll trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I've taken a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and cut that down with the Hello Bluebird nesting square dies. And then I'm taking the MFT Rolling Hills stencil and blending on some spun sugar Distress Oxide ink. So this ink is super pale, but the next shade up, Kitsch Flamingo, is a little too bright. I needed something that had more of this dusty quality to match the coloring that I've done. So I just stuck with this one shade, but I made sure to lay it on pretty heavily, especially where it is just leaving the stencil and then kind of lifting off as it goes up the paper, so I get a little bit of a softer haze. And then I turned my stencil and continued blending that ink on so that I got a different cloud formation. And I'll do one more of these on the panel. A lot of this is going to get covered up with the other background elements, but I just want to make sure that I had enough of those clouds showing on there. And then I added a little more spun sugar down at the bottom. And then I wanted to do some splatter, so I grabbed an acrylic block because there wasn't a lot of room left on that Waffle Flower Mini Media mat, and it's a lot easier to just clean it up off the acrylic block anyway. So I pressed some of that ink onto there and watered it down, and then I'm going to splatter that all over my background. But I wanted to add something that gave it more of a fall vibe, so I went to my Gansai Tambi Starry Colors and picked up this kind of coppery gold shade and did some splatter detail with that as well. And then I'm going to set this panel aside to dry. I've cut down 2 panels with the Hello Bluebird Grassy Knolls, and I'm going to start with some squeezed lemonade for these. Just blending that on all over the entire panel, so it doesn't have to be too specific. It's going to get a lot more color on there. I'm going to do that on both the larger and the smaller section. And then once that is covered, I'm going to darken things up with fossilized amber. So I'm going to bring that in from the top grassy border and go pretty far down because I do want that darker fall feel. I don't want too much of that lighter, brighter squeezed lemonade. But I did go back to the squeezed lemonade to just blend the transition area between the two. And then to darken that up even further, I'm going to grab some gathered twigs Distress Oxide. And I'm going to be careful not to add too much of that on there because I don't want it to go completely brown. I'm kind of starting completely off the paper and taking some of that ink off on the mat and then just adding that to the very top edge to darken things and give it that really fall harvest vibe. So I blended that back out with the other two shades, and then I'm going to add some of that gathered twigs onto my acrylic block once again and do some splatter detail with that. And then I'll jump right into my coppery gold watercolor as well and add some of that so it gets that nice shine to it. It really adds a lot when you tip the card into the light. It just really glimmers. So the last piece that I needed for this little scene was a road for my girl to ride her bike down. So I took the little front grassy piece from the ocean scene die set from Hello Bluebird, and I'm going to use that as my road. So I'm blending on some of that gathered twigs, just using that one shade, but I went over it lightly the first time and then darkened up the top edge. Did a little more splatter with just what was left on that block, and then a little bit of the copper splatter as well. And while that's drying, I'm going to make my card base. So I'm trimming it down to 10.5 by 5.25. And then I'm going to put that in my scoring tool and score that at 5.25. So it'll be 5.25 by 5.25. I'll use my Teflon coated bone folder to just reinforce the seam. And now I'm going to go back to that Cozy Days pattern paper from Simple Stories and choose another print to contrast the floral print that I'm going to be using. And I went back and forth between this kind of dusty indigo background and the pink polka dot, but ended up going with this one here. So I'm going to use the new Gallery Frame 7 to cut down the floral print, and then I'll use some of the nesting squares to cut down the polka dot print. I also cut down a piece of white cardstock just to act as a stabilizer behind that floral frame. So I'm going to glue those together using my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue and making sure that everything is lined up nice and straight. Then I'll flip that frame over and add a tiny bit of glue right to the very inside edge of that frame, and I will line that up over the polka dot print, and when it's nice and straight I'll press that down to pick that up so it has like a secondary frame, like a little mat inside the frame. Now that my background has dried, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. This time I'm using some ground espresso Distress Oxide ink. I wanted something that was a darker brown that would lay over the other Distress Oxides that I used on this background. So I'm using my Twiddler's Nook pressure pal to make sure I have a really nice impression. And I stamped "The best days are when we are together." And then on the inside of the card, I'm going to stamp my little corgi again, chasing the other running dog from the set, and the sentiment that says, "Have a happy day." So now that all of the elements are done, it's time to start assembling this card. So I'm going to add this background piece onto the front of my card base, just making sure that's on there straight, so that sentiment will be straight. And then I'm going to add the first yellow grassy border pretty high up on that scene because I want it to look like a really nice hill. And I started out adding this little road down at the bottom, but it was way too low. So the way that I figured out how to do this was just to take that back off while that glue was still wet enough. I added some more liquid glue to the back of it, and then I added some liquid glue to the very bottom of the bottom piece so that I could tuck in the road and make sure I had it in the correct position for this scene. So then I just smoothed everything down in place and added some foam tape to the back of my frame, so that will be popped up and add a little bit of dimension. So I'm going to just remove those release papers and then line that up with the edges of my card and press that down to adhere it. And then I can bring in my images. I'm going to start with this little girl. And I realized as I started to put her on that because of where I put that sentiment, I wasn't able to put her in the center of the scene like I'd planned. So I had to shift her over to the left, which was totally fine, except that it'll mean that the balloon is going to have to get popped up a bit. But we'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to tuck the gift into the front of her little basket. And then I'm going to take this little floral bouquet and add that to her back basket. I'm going to tuck it up under her hair because her hair would be blowing in the wind out in front of it, I think. And then that balloon, like I said, it's not going to fit within the frame, so I'm going to end up popping it up so that it fits on top of the frame. So I added a little piece of foam tape to one side of it, and then I'll add some liquid glue to the rest of it, and then tuck that back underneath that floral bouquet so that it looks like it's tied into that basket. Then I'm going to take my two corgis and I want to kind of get them both on there and then move them around so that I have them in slightly different positions. So one's a little bit tipped forward and one's a little bit tipped back. And then all that's left are these three little leaves that I colored. So I put one up toward the sentiment to draw your eye upward, and then one kind of in the middle of the field. And then this last one, I was just trying to figure out where it went best, but decided to put it back by the tire. To finish off the card, I wanted to add a little extra sparkle. So I'm taking some Stardust Stickles and adding that to the balloon. I'm also going to put some on the ribbon in her hair and the ribbon on the gift as well, and then to the centers of the three leaves. So just a little bit here and there to add a little extra pop. And there you can see how that catches the light, and there is another peek at the inside. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a message down below. I love chatting with you guys. Also, make sure that you're subscribed and have your notifications turned on so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in these products, you'll find them listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to watch them. Thank you guys so much. I hope you all have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.